Thank you, sir. A very warm good morning, everyone. Good morning, Professor Majchetka, ma'am.
Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am. It is my proud privilege to welcome and introduce the distinguished speaker of today's talk, Professor Manju Jaitka, ma'am. Professor Manju Jaitka is Head of English Department at Sholini University, Solan. She was formerly a professor and chairperson of the Department of English at Punjab University, Chandigarh. Her fields of specialization and interest include American literature, English and American poetry, contemporary Indian writing, women's studies, and creative writing. With postdoctoral experience at Harvard and Yale, Professor Manju Jaitka has held assignments at top universities in India and abroad. Professor Manju Jaitka is recipient of several national and international fellowships, including a Fulbright and two Rockefeller Awards. Professor Manju Jaitka was the chairperson of the prestigious Chandigarh Sahitya Academy from 2008 to 2015. She is the founder, president, and the main functionary of MELO, an academic association with international linkages. Professor Manju Jaitka have authored 12 academic books and more than 60 research papers in reputed national and international journals. She is also a creative writer and has published two collections of poems, a play, and three novels, including Scandal Point and Amalthus Avenue. So today, Professor Manju Jaitka ma'am is going to talk about how to teach fiction by women. So very warm welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. It's better late than never, I guess.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
And I'm happy to address an event organized by the Central University of Punjab in Bathinda. I have not had any interaction with them earlier, even though there has been talk, but it has not materialized. But this is the first time it has materialized, and I'm happy to be here. Unfortunately, we are
Unfortunately, we are
starting.
starting.
I would
I
request
would request
everyone to
everyone
mute
to mute
themselves
themselves
because I get the echo. If some audio is on, then I get the echo from the other side. So please keep yourself muted unless I ask a question and you'd like to reply, then you can unmute yourself. So thank you very much. And I have a PowerPoint which I think I would like to share with you. Can you all see it?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So let me make it bigger. Yeah. We are talking about how to teach fiction. And it was announced how to teach fiction by women. I don't know if there are different ways of teaching fiction by women or teaching fiction by men. I'm going to give a general talk on how to teach fiction. And whatever I say would be applicable to whatever kind of fiction you wish to teach. It would be applicable to short fiction, to long fiction, to the novel, and also to writing by women, writing by marginalized ethnic groups, writing by men, and well, whatever. So these are some basic things that I am bringing to your notice. And well, let us see if you can benefit from it. Is the talk being recorded, Dinesh ji? Is the talk being
Yes,
recorded?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Send me a recording afterwards because I have some students who are busy with other classes who would like to
Ma'am.
see it. Yes. So as the girl who was introducing me, Kavita, told you, I have been teaching in Punjab University and now I'm teaching in Sholini University, and I have students scattered everywhere. Some of them are actually watching the screen right now, and I would like to say a thank you to them for joining. So let us move on from this point. We begin with a very basic question: what is fiction? And if I ask you what is fiction, I don't know what kind of replies I would get. Is there anybody who would like to volunteer what fiction is? What is fiction? So think about it, and if you would like to reply, switch on your audio and speak up. Otherwise, I just move on. Fiction is, well, fiction is different from reality. That is what you would say. Fiction is not real. Fiction is different from reality. And yet it does seem to have some relationship with reality, you would agree, in the sense that it gives us an illusion of reality, an illusion of reality. And whenever you read a novel, you always try and look for, the realistic element in it, the plausibility in a book. Not, I'm not talking about the probability or the possibility, but the plausibility, and you know the difference between possibility and plausibility. So there is some relationship with reality, but you must remember that fiction is fiction. And when I say fiction is fiction, I mean fiction does have elements of the imagination. So there is something imaginary in fiction. But, this is a big but. Fiction is true to human experience because it is invariably based on human experience. So it is based on human experience, which is why we turn to fiction, which is why we turn to why we turn to literature, because it shows us a mirror to ourselves, it shows us a mirror to our lives, a mirror to human experience. So it is true to reality. To some extent, it is true to reality. Of course, there are different kinds of novels. You have the supernatural, you have supernaturalism, you have surrealism, you have fantasy novels, and so on. But what I am talking about now is the kind of fiction we generally read and teach in the classroom. And I presume all of you are teachers or going to be teachers, or you have been teaching for a while and you are interested in the subject. And of course, if you have a different point of view, I would be happy to discuss it with you, because there is no one way of looking at literature, no one way of looking at how to teach fiction. So, how do we begin? Where do we begin? In the first place, just read the book. Read the book. So, if you have to teach a book, remember as a shortcut, you have to read the book. And I am sorry to say, I have come across some teachers and some students who who study a book without reading it. You cannot do that. If you want to be honest with yourself, if you want to be honest with your job, you have to read the book. Then, after reading the book, what do? You have to examine a few issues. You have to examine a few issues. So you've read the book, and then you have to think. Think. First, think, what is the target audience? You are expected to teach it, but you are expected to teach it to what kind of a group? What is the age group? What is their exposure? What is their level? Are they beginners or are they advanced learners? Right? So you will have a different way of teaching senior students. You will have a different way of teaching junior students, school students, kindergarten students, children, teenagers, adolescents, adults. So what is your target audience? That is very important. Now, sometimes you have laymen in the target audience. And when you have laymen, then you can't bring in too much of your literary jargon. So you have to adjust. So being a good teacher also means having common sense. So you have common sense and you see what is the level of your audience, and accordingly you either bring yourself down to their level or you raise your standard higher than it is, so that you can meet them where they are. So what is their level? What is their exposure? What is their exposure? So if they have no exposure at all towards the literary theories that you are familiar with, the literary approaches that you are familiar with, then you cannot possibly ram down their throats all the theories that you have studied in your master's, in your MPhil, in your PhD. You cannot do that. So what is their level of exposure? Please be sure of that. Are they beginners or are they advanced learners? And accordingly, you adjust your your, your teaching level. Then, very important, how much time do you have at your disposal? How much time do you have at your disposal? Do you have one semester? Do you have 1 week? Do you have 2 days? Or do you have just 1 hour or 2 hours? So your teaching method is going to depend on the time that you have at your disposal. And of course, you will say, how can you possibly teach a novel like, say, Tess of the D'Urberville? How can you teach it in 2 hours? Well, if you're an intelligent teacher, you know exactly what is important in the novel. And in 2 hours or even in 1 hour, you can give them the basic issues that the novel is concerned with. And then let the students read up more on their own. So how much time do you have at your disposal? And of course, if you have one whole semester to teach one novel, then you can take it at a leisurely pace. You can go chapter by chapter, you can linger over the titles, you can linger over the dedication, you can linger over the characters, over the ending, the language, the style, the sentence structures, the dialogue, and whatever. So it all depends on how much time you have at your disposal, right? Now, another question that you ought to face is, who are you? Who are you? And by that, I don't mean you have to say, oh, I'm Manju Jaitka, oh, I'm Kavita so-and-so. No, what do I mean when I say, who are you? What is your standpoint epistemology? What does standpoint epistemology mean? That means what do you believe in? What is the ideology that you subscribe to? What is your standpoint? What is your perspective, right? And continuing with that, what is your aim? Why are you teaching it? Why are you teaching this particular book? What is your purpose? Do you have an agenda? Or does the author have an agenda? If yes, what is the agenda? Is the agenda dissemination of information? There's a typo out here, dissemination of information. Or is the agenda indoctrination of the students? You know, sometimes you have a certain agenda in mind and you pick up a certain book saying that you are going to reform, you are going to transform the set of students that you have before you through this book. Is that so in your case? So think honestly. Look at yourself honestly. Who are you? What is your standpoint? Are you a leftist? Are you a rightist? Do you occupy the middle ground? What is your ideology? What are your beliefs? And why are you teaching it? Are you teaching it because you want to disseminate a certain kind of information, knowledge about the book? If you're teaching Lord of the Flies, for instance, if you're teaching Lord of the Flies, why are you teaching it? Of course, you are teaching it because it's in the course and you have to teach it. But what is it that you want to teach? Do you want to drive home a certain idea that within us, within all of us, there is good and evil that coexist, and we have to try and nurture the good and try and fight the evil? So what is your aim? And then what is the author's aim? Is the author's aim the same as yours? Sometimes you can be at loggerheads with the author. Sometimes you do not subscribe to the author's point of view, which is perfectly fine. And you can have a view. But be clear about what your aim, what your purpose, what your agenda is. And sometimes you tell a story for the sake of, a moral lesson which you want to convey to the readers, to the audience. For instance, if you look at the stories of the Panchtantra, all those stories have a moral lesson behind them. And that moral lesson, every story conveys a certain moral lesson because those stories they had an agenda behind them. So each story carried a moral lesson, and at the end of 6 months, those three princes who were supposed to be, they were being given education, they were all well versed in matters of worldly wisdom. Right? So what is your agenda? What is the author's agenda? And What do you want to impart to your students? Right? Then it's a good idea to find out how the book has been received. How is the book received? If it's a new book, there may not be too much information available. You will just have to depend on a few reviews that come in newspapers and journals. But if it is an old established text, then you will have so much of material available. And if we're taking the example of William Golding or maybe Thomas Hardy, Test of the D'Urberville, then there'll be so much of material available on the internet. Earlier, of course, we used to go to libraries and we used to hunt around for material on the books that we used to read. But now things are very easy for you. So find out, how has the book been received? Have people received it favorably, or have they been critical, and why? And when you have read the background, you are in a position to form your own ideas also. So you have read the book, you have read about the book, whatever material was available, and based on that, you can actually form your own opinion. What do you feel about the book and what do you wish to convey? Then, how familiar are the students with the book? Sometimes the students are familiar with the book because they have seen probably a film. So they've seen a film and they feel that they know the book, not realizing that the film can be very different from the book. However, you have to have some idea on this matter. Are the students aware of the book? Are they aware of the author or are they not? If they are aware of the book and the author, well, good for you. And you can carry on with your work without going into the very basic introduction of, who was Thomas Hardy or who was William Golding in which century and what were his dates and what were the main ideas of his work. You don't have to go too deep into that because the students are already familiar with it. You can just move ahead. Right. And then, what is the genre of the book? What is the genre of the book? And how far does the book adhere to the traditional genre that it falls in? For instance, if I'm giving you the example of Lord of the Flies again because I know it's in the syllabi of a lot of universities. Now, so if Lord of the Flies is in, if it falls into this genre of island literature, then you go back to Robinson Crusoe, you go back to Treasure Island, and you go back to other books like that, and see how it is different from the other books of the genre. You would say that the genre of the book is not so important. Yes, that's right. It's not so important because there is always a cross-genre movement of books, right? So you cannot put any one label on a book. You cannot really put it in one compartment and seal it up there. However, it is good to have some idea so that you can begin on that point and then you can move on. Right. Now, some people say that it is very useful to read out excerpts from the book. I mean, of course, you cannot read the whole book in the class. And so the suggestion comes from a lot of people that read some excerpts from the book in order to get students interested in it. I don't know what your opinion is. I don't know what you follow, but there are pros and cons of this method. Let's look at the pros. So would you read excerpts from the book? Now, reading excerpts may be good for a few things. For instance, it would tell you what genre the book falls in, right? So it can be a good genre indicator. Then you can get character descriptions. You read a certain passage about a character in the book, say about Tess of the D'Urberville. You read a certain passage, or either about Tess or about Angel Clare. You remember Angel Clare? And you get to know about his character. So when you are discussing the characters of the book, you have already read those passages, right? So reading excerpts of the book are good for genre indicators, for character descriptions, for settings. What is the setting of the book? It will tell you exactly where the action is located, where the story is located. So you read about Lord of the Flies and you get to know that this is a little island and these children have been dropped out there and now they have to fend for themselves. So the setting is given, right? You can read passages which relate to the setting. Then the opening of a book, the first few passages of a book. Once upon a time and a very good time it was, and so on. Or you read something else. There are, for instance, the opening of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. It is a fact, it is a truth universally acclaimed that acknowledged that every man who has good, I don't remember the exact words, who has good fortune and good money is in search of a wife and so on. So you can look at the opening sentences of the opening passages of a book, and invariably the theme of the book is laid bare in the beginning, or at least it prepares you for something which may or may not be contradicted later on. Then the endings, openings and endings are always crucial in a book. So you could read the openings, you could read the endings. And the ending of a book, how does it end? Does it end in a tragedy? The president of the Immortals has finished his game with Tess, and you know that last passage of Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Or the last passage that says, Reader, I married him. Reader, I married him. So there are these openings and endings which stay in your mind and which actually get the reader, get the audience, get the student interested in what is happening, right? Then you can also read excerpts which are cliffhangers. What do we what do we mean by cliffhangers? Cliffhangers are, literally when you are sitting at the edge of the cliff, when there is a point which is full of suspense and you don't know whether you are going to fall or whether you're going to pick up again and move on. So cliffhangers are moments, events, not events, I would call them moments when there is a lot of suspense and you don't really know how the story is going to proceed. It's literally like hanging on a cliff. And these cliffhangers you usually find in books that are adventure stories or detective stories and so on. So these are starter activities. Reading excerpts from a book are good for starter activities. I remember when we were doing The Wasteland. Wasteland is not fiction, it is poetry, but it is a long poem and it can be intimidating. So we had a teacher who made it interesting for us by taking out those scenes from The Wasteland. So what he did was he said, okay, let's move on to section 3 and look at this scene. And then let's move on to section 5 and look at this scene. And then move on to section 2, look at this scene. So we read scenes first. And if you have read The Wasteland, you would know that in the wasteland, in the 5 sections of the wasteland, there are some scenes, and those scenes are connected with the theme, statement of the theme. So there is a theme that connects all these scenes. The scene, for instance, the scene at the pub. Hurry up, please, it's time. If you read The Wasteland, and I hope you've all read it, because if you're students of literature, you have to be familiar with The Wasteland. So hurry up, please, it's time. That scene at the pub, that is one scene, right? Then you have another, the Hyacinth Girl episode. You gave me Hyacinth once a year ago. They called me the Hyacinth Girl. So that is another scene out there. And when you came back from the garden, my eyes were, I could not see, and my hands were full of flowers, and so on and so forth. That's another scene, right? The Hyacinth Garden episode. Then you have, then you can read another scene. For instance, the neurotic lady and her companion in a room that is full of smoke, that has the atmosphere of Juliet's tomb, if you remember. And the woman says, what are you thinking of? Do you know nothing? Do you see nothing? And the man says, I know that those are pearls that were his eyes. Right? So there are these different scenes that our teacher actually brought out before us, and we started wondering what is happening. And then we read the theme that connects all those scenes. Right? So these are starter activities. You could actually read some excerpts and then move on from there. All right, now let me give you some useful tips. In the first place, choose your books wisely. Choose your books wisely. Now, I know that most of you are teaching in institutions where you do not have a choice as such. You do not have a choice, so you cannot choose the books that you want to teach because the syllabus comes to you from the university. However, if you have the option, then you just choose your books wisely. So if you are a member of the Board of Studies, then see what books are you prescribing? What books are being prescribed? And if you feel that a certain book is being prescribed which the students will not enjoy, which you will not enjoy reading, then just put your foot down, or at least make your voice heard that no, this book is not right. Let us pick another one. So choose your books wisely. And sometimes, you are fortunate. You can actually design your own course. You can design your own course. And then that is the time when you can put in the books that you enjoy reading, that you know that the students will also enjoy reading. And whenever I got the chance, I put in books that I felt the students would enjoy. For instance, I have included Alice in Wonderland in the course. Unusual, isn't it? But I've included Alice in Wonderland. I have also included The Little Prince. If you haven't read The Little Prince, please read The Little Prince. Then I've also included books like Jonathan Livingston Seagull, and all the books that I've personally enjoyed reading. Because if you enjoy what you're doing, then the chances are you will exude that mood, that attitude, and your students would enjoy it too. And every time I give the example of Tom Sawyer whitewashing his fence, Tom Sawyer whitewashing his fence comes to the realization that there is a difference between work and play. Work is something that you're obliged to do. And play is something you enjoy doing. And if your work becomes play, then nothing like it. So treat your work like play, and you bet you will enjoy it, and so will your students enjoy it. Right? Then, when you start your lessons, whenever you enter the class, start it with a recap of what you have done earlier. Chances are that some students might have been absent, or they were absent-minded, or whatever the case, it's good to begin with a recap because then you can continue from where you left. So begin with a recap, tell them of what you did yesterday, and then that would prepare them for what you are going to do today, right? Then there are some teaching aids that you can actually bring into the classroom. What are those teaching aids? For instance, from time to time, you can give them a quiz. Divide the class into two. Make two teams, make three if you want, and give them a quiz. You don't want to do too much extra work? Well, you just tell the teams to form their questions and quiz each other. So there are always ways of going about it without making it a drudgery or a punishment for yourself. You could also ask them to do dramatic adaptations. For instance, in one of my classes, when we started, earlier we did not have internal assessment. that when we started internal assessment, we had to give them something for their assignments. And 1 year for assignments, I just told them, enact any one scene from from the text that you are doing. And the students jumped at the idea. So somebody enacted a scene from The Tempest, somebody else enacted a scene from The Rape of the Lock, and so on. And it was good fun. So teaching does not have to be a drudgery. Teaching does not have to be a punishment. You can make it interesting. You can make it enjoyable. You can treat your work like play. Next, you can also show them videos and films. For instance, when you are doing Pygmalion. Now, Pygmalion, the title itself is enough to intimidate you, because to intimidate a student, because the student would say, who is Pygmalion, and who is this character? We've never heard about him, and so on. And then you give them the story of Pygmalion, and the statue that came to life, the statue that he fell in love with, and so on. But a very simple way of going about it is showing them the film My Fair Lady. And when you show them the musical, Rex Harrison and Audrey Hepburn, when you show them the musical, well, that's one way of getting into the text, making it familiar with them, and then you can turn to the text, right? So you can show them videos, you can show them films, and if you don't have the time or the space to show them, or the studio to show them a film or a video, then you just send them a link. Send them a link, let them see it, and then you discuss it with them, right? Then illustrations, illustrations also of the book. For instance, Alice in Wonderland, if it did not have pictures, it would not be half as interesting as it is. So show them pictures, show them illustrations, and everything is available online. You are really a very lucky generation because you have the internet at your disposal. When we were studying, when we began teaching, when we were doing our PhDs, all these facilities were not there. So count your blessings and move on from there. All right. Now, what are the various methods of approaching a novel? Let's see. See, there are traditional methods. For instance, you have E.M. Forster in Aspects of the Novel. He tells you how to approach a text. And then you also have contemporary critical methods. You would probably ask me, which method is better than the other? And I would say, well, you can't really make a list of which is the best and which is the worst. You cannot really put them down that way. You make use of whatever works for you. And once again, that rare commodity called common sense, which a lot of people seem to lack, that rare commodity will come to your rescue, and then that will tell you what methods to use. Right. So E.M. Forster came out with his Aspects of the Novel, and he told you that there are various ways of looking at the book. For instance, you can look at the plot and the subplot. Every novel has a plot. So it has a plot, one main plot, and it can have side plots also. It can have subplots also. So what are those? You're reading a book, and then you want to know what is the plot of this book and what is the subplot. So you kind of look at it critically and try and decipher. Then the characters, and you've been told that characters can be flat, and I'm just revising things that you are already familiar with. But these are good to know, because sometimes when you ask your students to do practical criticism of a certain passage, then they are at a loss and they do not know what practical criticism is. And well, if they ask you a question offhand, even you may not come up with the right kind of things, but you keep these things in mind. These are traditional ways of looking at a text. What are the characters like? Are they flat characters or are they round characters? Are they simple or are they complex? Are they black or white? Sometimes you can have characters who are purely evil, or characters who are very goody-goody, absolutely white. And then you also have characters who are shades of gray, who are more realistic, right? Then, are the characters static or are they dynamic? Are they static or are they dynamic? That means a character in the book, does he remain the same throughout or does he evolve? Take, for instance, Don Quixote. Don Quixote in Cervantes' novel, is he a flat character? Is he a round character? And is he a dynamic character? Does he improve or does he remain the same? And if you have not read Don Quixote, well, you have missed something. Please read Don Quixote now. Right. Then, a book, a novel always has conflict. Without conflict, a story lacks depth. So there is always some kind of a tussle, some kind of a conflict in a novel, and that conflict can be external or it can be internal. What do I mean by that? External meaning between two people or two groups or two countries or two communities and so on. External conflict. Internal conflict within a person, the psychological conflicts that we are always, well, we always face sometime or the other in our lives. Right? Next, what is the book about? What is the subject of the book? What is the subject of the book? The subject is different from the theme, mind you. The subject can be just a subject. But the theme is what the book says about the subject. The subject of the book can be Tess of the D'Urberville. But the theme, what does the book say about the subject? Or what does the book say about society? What does it say about humanity? What does it say about the individual? What does it say about nature? So there are lots of questions you need to ask yourself when you are teaching, when you are studying, and you first have to study, only then can you teach a novel. So all these questions need to be asked whenever you teach a novel. Continuing with the different methods of approaching a novel, I would say, when you're reading a novel, think whose point of view is being presented out here. And what do I mean by point of view? From whose perspective is the story being told? Is it the author? Or is it the hero of the book? Or is it the anti-hero? Or is it the villain? Or is it the victim or the oppressor? So whose point of view is being presented in this story? Which characters? Is the character diegetic or intradiegetic or extra-diegetic? So is the character a part of the story? Is the character telling the story about himself? Or is the character outside the story that is being narrated? Right? So whose point of view? Or is it the point of view of an omniscient narrator? An omniscient narrator? An omniscient narrator, we have been told, is like God paring his fingernails, detached from the story. So is it an omniscient narrator or is it a narrator that is involved in the story? So decide, figure out who is the narrator. Next, how many levels of narration are there in the book? What do I mean by levels of narration? How many levels of narration are there in the book? A story can have multiple levels of narration. For instance, there can be the first and foremost narrator is the storyteller, is the writer, say Cervantes. So Cervantes may be the first storyteller, and he is telling the story, taking up the first person, in the first person, but the speaker is somebody else. So that is another level. And that speaker might start telling you a story of various characters who, in the course of the story, they start narrating different stories. So you have a story within a story, within a story, within a story. And that is what makes a meta-narrative. It is like You know those Chinese dolls or those Burmese dolls, Russian dolls, whatever they are. There is a doll, you open the doll, there's another doll inside. You open it and there's still another doll, and so on and so forth. Or you have those Chinese boxes, one box inside the other, and so on. The best example that I would give you is that of the Kathasarit Sagar. The Kathasarit Sagar. If you haven't read the Kathasarit Sagar, well, you need to read it. You need to read it, because how can you be students of literature if you're not familiar with the Panchtantra and the Kathasarit Sagar, where you have multiple levels of narration? And if you want me to talk about them, I cannot do it in this lecture, because that would require a separate lecture altogether. All right. Then you look at the symbolism in the novel. So if you're talking about To the Lighthouse, for instance, what does the lighthouse symbolize? How are emotional states depicted in the novel? Right? The Lord of the Flies, the island, the foliage of the island, the fire that burns down a part of it. What does all that signify? The shell which you have out there, and then the hog's head, the pig's head that you have. What are all these symbolic of? See, you need to think, you need to analyze whenever you are teaching a book. And then, of course, you look at the language. The language. When you study the language, what does the language denote? And what are the connotations of the language that is used? All this comes into play when you are teaching the book. And of course, irony. Is there any irony in the book? And what kind of an irony do you have there? Is it verbal irony, dramatic, situational, attitudinal? You know the different kinds of irony we have. So what kind of irony do you have there? Is it satire? And what is it satirizing? Ask yourself questions. Make your students ask questions. Next, you have the chronotopes of the text. Chronotopes. Now this phrase, you would probably be aware, comes from Bakhtin, Mikhail Bakhtin. Chronotopes means the time and the space of a novel. So the chronotopes of the text means the time, chronos and topos, time and space of the text. What is the setting? What is the time? What is the space? So if a novel, you know that this novel has been set at the time of, for instance, the French Revolution, or it has been set colonial India. So that is the time. And the space, what is the space? So perhaps it is New Delhi, or it could be Himachal, or it could be Shimla, or whatever. What are the chronotopes of the text? That means the landscape, setting, time, and so on. You need to remember that there is no single way of looking at a text. You know about the poem, or perhaps you ought to be familiar with the poem by Wallace Stevens, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. In that poem, there are 13 stanzas, and in each stanza, you have a different view of the blackbird. The blackbird remains the same, but you can see different meanings in that one image of the blackbird depending on the context. So sometimes in one stanza, for instance, you have the blackbird against a snowy landscape. In another, you have a blackbird sitting on a bare branch of a tree. In a third, you may have the blackbird, just the shadow of the blackbird, flying over a hearse that is being taken. In another, you may have a blackbird dancing at the feet of women. So there are different ways of looking at a blackbird, and every time you look at the blackbird, you can find a different meaning. Similarly, there are different ways of looking at a text. No one way of looking at a novel is the final one. Keep this in mind. And as students of literature, you need to be broad-minded. You need to be aware of the fact that what you think is the meaning of a text may not be the meaning if somebody else looks at it. There are different ways of looking at a text. All of them, all those ways can be different, and they may all be correct. Not just 13, but 101. Or if you look at the magical number of 1001 Arabian Nights, there can be 1001 ways of looking at a text. So there is no single way of writing a novel, as you know, and there is no single way of reading it. If I want to write a novel, it's entirely up to me how I wish to write it. I may wish to write it in the first person, in the second person. Usually second person is not employed, but I may wish to write it in the first person or the third person. I may wish to write it in the present tense or in the past tense. I may wish to write it in the linear manner or a disjointed manner. There is no single way of writing a novel and no single way of reading it either. So don't be dogmatic when you try to decipher the meaning of a book. And there are different approaches that you have all studied in your masters, in your MPhil, and as research scholars, you've studied about different approaches to the text. You have the formalistic or the structuralist, you have the psychological, you have the Marxist, sociological, feminist, archetypal, and so on. So there are different ways of looking at a text, and depending on what your attitude is, what your tastes are, how you would like to read the text, you may choose one method and not another. For instance, if the Marxist method does not appeal to me, well, there's nothing that binds me to look at a text from the Marxist point of view. I may prefer to look at it maybe from the archetypal point of view or the feminist. So that is entirely up to you and also up to the audience that you have. What is their understanding of the approach that you are adopting? That also makes a difference. We can actually, we can go into detail regarding any of these approaches and how they can be applied to a particular text. But let me move on. Now, as you are aware, literature is an expression of an attitude towards life, right? It is an expression of the writer's experiences, the writer's point of view, the writer's philosophy, and whatever. So you experience the world and you want to say something about it in order to analyze your own experiences. That makes literature an attempt to impose some kind of order on life. So life as such seems to be rather chaotic. I'm trying to understand it, and so I write about it. While I'm writing about it, I clarify my own ideas. Similarly, when you are reading a text, when you are studying a text, when you're trying to understand it and teach it, you are trying to impose some kind of order on the vast canvas that you encounter in a book. Right? So the book can be huge. It can be like James Joyce's Ulysses, for instance. What is he talking about? It is, in Ulysses, he's talking about just one day in the life of one man. June 16th, 1904. That is called the Bloomsday. I hope I've got the date right. June 16, 1904. That is called Bloomsday. So it is just about one day and hundreds of pages. How many pages? 1400 pages or whatever. In any case, so how do you read that novel and how do you interpret it? You read it, you try and work it out, you try and see some order in it, and only then will you be able to teach it to your students. If you have not understood it, how are you going to teach it? Now, When you are looking at a text, some texts are readerly and some are writerly. These are phrases that you may have encountered when you did your contemporary critical theory, particularly Roland Barthes in Sir Z. So is the text readerly or is it writerly? That means a readerly text would be a closed text. You read it and you have to accept it as it is. A writerly text would be kind of open-ended. You can write along with it. That is the difference between the two. So what kind of a text are you reading? What kind of a book are you reading? Apply your mind to it and think. And I would give you the example of Shashi Tharoor's Riot. Shashi Tharoor's Riot. Now, if you haven't read the book, you must read it because I love the experimentation that he has done in that book. Shashi Tharoor, in any case, is a delight to read because of his mastery over the language. Plus, in that book, he has made an experiment which I think is very successful. He leaves it kind of open-ended, and you are left to figure out what actually happened and how did it happen. So there are lots of questions that are left in your mind. And coming back to a point I've made earlier, in a book you have the expression of the author's sensibility or experiences. But is that really true? I am referring to that so-called impersonality of the writer that we heard about when we did T.S. Eliot, impersonality. Now, when you read a book, is it the expression of the author's sensibility or the author's experiences? For instance, if I write a murder story, then is it the expression of, am I actually talking about something that, a murder that I've committed? Oh, come on, not like that. So it's not fair to say that Shakespeare says to be or not to be is the problem. Shakespeare is not saying it. Hamlet is saying it, right? The point that I'm trying to make is that a work, a text, a book is not necessarily autobiographical. The author is not necessarily talking about his or her own experiences. It's not necessarily confessional. Then what is it? That's for you as the teacher, as the reader to decide, right? Then there are narrative strategies. And when we talk about narrative strategies, I can go on and on and on because I've actually written a whole book on narratology, which you may like to read at some point. Now, the narrative of a book, how does the story go? Is it linear? Is it circular? Or is it shifting? How does the story proceed? So when you are teaching a book, this question is handy. What is the narrative like? How does it, is it a linear story? For instance, let me take the story of Oedipus Rex. Oedipus Rex. Is it a straightforward story that is being narrated? Or is there something else in it? Does it begin with the beginning and end with the end? No, it begins somewhere in the middle. It begins in the middle with Oedipus coming out. He comes out to meet the townsmen and ask them, what is your problem? And they are the ones who tell him that we are very unhappy because there is death, there is disease, there is plague, and the crops don't grow and the rain will not fall and so on. And he says, okay, I know about your problem and I have sent my kinsman to the temple of Apollo, to Delphi, to find out from the oracle what is wrong, right? So meanwhile, Creon comes. And Creon comes and he says, there is one pollutant amongst us that has to be removed if Thebes is to be prosperous again. Who is the pollutant? What is the pollutant? And then the story goes back to the past. The story goes back to the past, goes back to Oedipus's growing up years, goes back to the time when he ran from his foster parents, he bumped into his real biological father, killed him, and so on. So the story is not moving in a linear manner. It starts in the middle. It starts ante rem. Ante rem, that means in the middle. It goes back to the beginning, and then it comes again, and then it moves forward. So when you're looking at the narrative of a book, try and figure out, is it a linear story beginning with once upon a time and ending with and they lived happily ever after? Is it a straight story or is it circular? You know, sometimes you go back to the point where you started. And I'm reminded of T.S. Eliot's quotation. The end of all our exploration is to go back to the place where we started and know the place for the first time. Now, some stories, some books have a circular pattern, particularly in detective fiction. In detective fiction, you begin with a certain place. In the beginning, everything is peaceful. It's an Edenic situation, like the Garden of Eden. And then something comes from outside, a person or an event or something like that, and causes a lot of chaos. And that chaos has to be set right so that we can come back to the Edenic state once more. Right? So what is the pattern of the narrative? Is it straight? Is it circular? Or is it shifting? Does it move backward and forward? Are there flashbacks and flash forwards? They are called prolepsis and analepsis. Prolepsis and analepsis. In films in particular, you often have a flashback and you have a flash forward. In books also, sometimes you have a flashback and a flash forward, and you as the teacher should be aware of all that. Then, is the book open-ended? Is the book open-ended? So, does it leave you with questions in your mind and you wonder what happened next? Is it open-ended or does it close on a note of finality? Again, I tell you, you have to read the book. You have to read the book, you have to break it up into parts and then put them together again. That is the best way of understanding it. And when you have understood it, you will be able to teach it. When you're reading the book, make marginal notes, deconstruct it, and note the techniques that have been used in the novel. That is very important. Now, these days, we read a lot of books online. You have the PDFs which are available online. There are ways of marking, annotating, making marginal notes, even on the PDFs that you read online. There are lots of ways of doing that. And I would suggest, if you're serious students of literature, because you're not going to libraries and borrowing books anymore, it's best to get hold of the PDFs which are available online and learn how to annotate them on your laptops. That will be a great help. All right. Then you have to find ways of making the discussion interesting. And I repeat, you have to bring in some films, videos, anecdotes, quizzes, and so on. All these are ways of making your class an interesting one. You also have to watch out for intertextuality. Actually, I should have referred to intertextuality earlier, but well, anyway, we're talking about it now, intertextuality. So what does the book remind you of? Are there other texts like this one that you are reading? So look out for intertextuality. Look out for connections. You know, if you have read The Archetypal Approach, if you've read Northrop Frye, what are you told? You are told that there are certain motifs that are present in the world, archetypes, and all stories are built around those motifs. For instance, you have the rags to riches pattern, you have the lost and found pattern, and so on. So there are all these motifs that are already present, and stories are built around those motifs with a little bit of variation here and there. So look out for those patterns, and that makes your journey into the book even more exciting. You know, it is John Coetzee, who says that there are only a handful of stories in the world. And whatever we have, whatever we read, are actually variations of those handful of stories that exist in the world. Finally, I would say that you need to enjoy the book that you are teaching. Enjoy the book and exude your enthusiasm to your students. Otherwise, all your efforts are wasted. Now, I come to another question. How to teach fiction in Corona times? This is a question that I am not going to ask. You will tell me how to teach fiction in Corona times. We can do that in the discussion. And with that, I say thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. I would ask, if you have any questions, kindly ask, ma'am. Or, uh,
Yes,
or you
are there
can.
any questions? Are there any questions? Any observations? Anything you would like to share?
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, madam, and good morning, Dr. Dinesh. This is Devdut Mukherjee from Kolkata.
Yes, they
Ma'am,
do.
I was listening to your lecture. One very interesting point that cropped up was regarding narratology. And said that you have written a book on narratology. So I
Yes.
just want to know the name of the book, if you can.
Narratives across borders.
Narratives Across Borders. All right.
See, I tend to forget, is it narratives across borders or narratives across cultures?
All right, ma'am.
But
I will.
you'll find it somewhere. Yeah, you'll find it online somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, or even if I can get your email ID, then I can send you an email and you can let me know.
Yes, my email ID is manju@shuliniuniversity.com.
manju of Shulini
.com.
.com. Thank you. Because I am really interested on this point. It was
Yes, it's a fascinating subject.
yes, yes.
Now tell me, somebody said that the slides were not moving. Weren't the slides moving?
Yeah, I also found the slides were not moving.
Well,
Maybe it was a technical snag.
at least my slides were moving, and I'm sorry if they were not moving, but I did take care of all the points that I wanted to discuss with you.
Yes, ma'am, one more point that I want to, it's an observation. You talked about dramatizing a text when you are teaching. For example, I remember I taught Mayor of Casterbridge to students of general students. They were not honor students. So
Not literature students,
it was really a task because I teach at a non-urban college, so language was a problem. So what I tried to do was that I made someone Mayor of Casterbridge. I made someone his wife, and that was the way in which I taught, and it really helped. At least they understood the text. I teach in such a college where the general students even find it very difficult to
I understand.
frame a sentence. So for them, this was really very helpful. Yes, this is what I want to share. And you asked about teaching fiction during Corona times. Well, the process that our college follows is teaching through a centralized LMS, learning management system. Where we have to upload our audios, and if we make some videos in a particular format. So the students were not really interested in downloading so many audios. I mean, the first point that came up was that, sir, our memory, phone memory or the tablet is getting filled up.
Absolutely.
So, yes. So what I did was that I went out of that particular LMS system by informally letting the principal know, and I started taking class on Google Meet.
Yes.
That was one way of teaching them. It was really difficult, but anyhow, and sharing videos, sharing YouTube links. Sometimes we don't share it, but if we can really go through some of the YouTube links, some YouTubers are there who really work hard in making a particular link or something like that.
Yes.
That really helped out. So I find, ma'am, that reading texts by students, maybe because of some reason, isn't getting a kind of thumbs up from their side. Nowadays, I find they don't tend to read the text. They don't tend to sit and read a novel, big fat novel like Charles Dickens's David Copperfield or Jane Eyre's or Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. What I find is that if they get an audio-visual element, like of slides or forming it in a drama, like a drama, then they tend to learn better than what they generally learn after reading. For example, I also tried to create a kind of interpretation of Macbeth in my college, where students were very much afraid of reading Macbeth because most of them belong to the state boards where they had not learned the play. So naturally, it was a task. These were some of the ways that I adopted, and I have got results.
Yes, I think most of us are doing that.
Yes,
most of us are doing that. It is a challenge, but we have to devise our own ways of how to go about it, how to keep them interested. So if you give them short assignments and get feedback from them, that really works. Would anybody else like to share?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for a very riveting session. I am Nidhi Sharma, Assistant Professor at ARSD College, Delhi University, and more happy to say that I am your student, PhD research student.
I'm glad to join,
Ma'am, it's always an unmissable session. Ma'am, your talk actually stimulated many threads on teaching novels. I have one question today. Since you are also a very celebrated author and...
let's cut that out. Let's cut that out.
I just want to know from you, what could be the idea, I mean, from the novelist perspective also, and also from the teacher's perspective, what could be the idea behind having an unnamed narrator? For instance, when it so happened when I was teaching Shadow Lines by Amitav Ghosh to my first year students, and when I finished, among many other emotions that I felt at the end, there was one emotion which was of, very, this was of inadequacy, that I couldn't know the narrator well, because it was so believable and it was so absorbing. Just, there was this feeling that I couldn't know him well. So, ma'am, what is your idea? Have you actually explored unnamed narrators in your books? Or what is your take on it, ma'am?
You know what? I haven't really thought about it, because, but what I feel is if the narrator is unnamed, then it gives you a little more to think about, a little more to study, and another angle to go into. Who could the narrator be? Whose point of view is being presented? Right? So it becomes even more teachable, even more researchable, if you want to coin a phrase. So one more angle that you can possibly explore.
Okay, ma'am.
In order to make a story plausible, I think it's very important to have a particular narrator and identify that narrator also.
Okay, ma'am.
Sometimes it is just the author who's telling the story. The author is telling the story, and he's not really personified. The story has an omniscient kind of a narration. There are lots of characters. That has its advantage because the writer can go into everybody's mind, everybody's psychology, and identify himself or herself with all the characters. But if it's only one character, then that perspective is limited. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. It's just that, ma'am, could be just adding to maybe thinking aloud, ma'am. This kind of an unnamed narrator thing didn't trouble me when I was reading Heart of Darkness. I could still be okay with it, a kind of a satisfaction. But I don't know, maybe I was a little baffled, or maybe I wanted more. That was the beauty of Ghosh characterization. Could be probably that. Could be a subjective thing also. Yeah.
See,
Thank you.
for instance, I wrote a story about a boy who tried to murder someone. He tried to murder someone, and he did not succeed. And so the story begins. I wish I had not failed. I wish I'd actually driven my dagger into his heart, into his fat black heart, or something like that. Now, in that case, it is just one person's point of view, and then the reasons why the person wants to kill that particular man, all those reasons come out, but it is a limited perspective. We cannot go into other people's perspectives unless we divide the story in the novel into different parts.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, Anusha.
Yes, sir. Can I ask?
Yes, please.
Ma'am, good morning.
Good morning.
Anusha. I'm a first-year research scholar in Department of English at CU Punjab. Ma'am, as I have already typed in the chat box, what I believe is that audiovisual and everything is rather good, very good, no doubt about it. But I feel that already everything is going online. So also we are making it too easy for the students and too complacent for them to only see something and just depend on visual but not do anything on their own. It will not take the joy out of critical analysis, the crux which excites most of the literature students whenever we come for
You have hit the nail on the head. You have hit the nail on the head. Now let me read out your comment. I hadn't seen it earlier. Can we divide several parts of the novel among students as group assignments and engage them in successive presentations of their critical analysis? Yes. It may be theme-wise or based on several critical points. So they do read the book and they learn to critique. Yes, you are very right. And I love your observation, because we do not have to spoon feed the students so much that they become totally crippled. We have to teach them to stand on their own feet. So you have to make them work, and at the same time, you have to try and make them enjoy what they're reading. Then Sunita Rai has said something. Many works are available on YouTube. We can send the link and discuss later. But this can be done in Corona period. You're absolutely right, Sunita.
Thank you, ma'am.
Madam,
Anusha, what are you working on? Yes, she's gone off.
Yeah. I'm working on female subjectivity using critical discourse analysis of some select contemporary Disney movies, ma'am. I'll be working
Disney
on
movies. Disney movies. Why Disney movies? Because you're lazy to read books?
No, ma'am, definitely not. As you can see, I have a library of my own, but
Oh, yes,
I
yes.
wanted to do, based on the thrust areas available, I had prepared a proposal and I thought I can do it. And Disney is an obsession for me. So.
Okay, very good. Yes, somebody else had a question? Any other question or observation? Yeah?
Yes. This is Devdut again. I just want to ask you one more question. I was listening to your comments as well as Miss Anusha's comments. What are we supposed to focus on in today's teaching learning scenario? Are we going to focus on learning, or are we going to focus on evaluation? Because if I comment on Miss Anusha's comment, she's saying about critical analysis. That's from a research point of view. That's from a critical point of view. But when teaching when teaching UG students come, or when teaching students who come maybe from background where they have not learned so much of literature, unlike many of us, then where should we focus on? Should we not focus on the understanding of the level of learners, which you were talking about some time back, or should we focus on our own viewpoint? So does the teacher become the narrator, another narrator of the text? When he or she narrates? Madam, you pointed out regarding...
Yes. No, the last point first. The last point first. Yes, the teacher becomes another narrator of the text. And what do we give? What do we have thrust on? Do we have thrust on making them understand or evaluating them? I think the thrust should be on making them understand and widening their horizons. Don't forget, you are a teacher and your job is to disseminate knowledge. Your job is to impart instructions, impart knowledge, not just to give them marks.
Yes. Right. So, ma'am, there is a debate on on this from the point of view of pedagogy versus you say the point of view of the students' outlook, means how they look at the text or how they will understand the text. Will they understand it through audiovisual means, or will they understand it through reading of the text, or if we divide it into assignments? So that's what I think is the moot point of all our discussion, I think.
Yes.
Thank you.
You see, nothing can be a substitute for the interpersonal relationship that we used to have with the students before Corona times. But the fact remains, now we cannot have that face-to-face relationship, so we have to make the best of the circumstances, right? And given these circumstances, well, you use your intelligence, use your common sense, and try and work with them the best way possible. So partly through some assignments, partly through teaching, partly through interactions, discussions, all this comes into the picture. But whatever you do, I would repeat, make sure that you are 100% into it, make sure that you are enjoying it. Otherwise, your students will also take it as drudgery.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes.
Good morning.
Yes.
Ma'am, I'm Disha.
Yes, Disha. Disha, yes.
Thank you. I've greatly learned from your lectures and even some earlier ones where I think where you had said that a 1 hour lecture in real time cannot be equal to a 1 hour online lecture, which was a big thing I learned because when the classes began online, it was all about making the most of 1 hour. But time does work very differently. So that is one thing I realized. The next is, ma'am, that there was a text, it's not in syllabus anymore, which was Tristram Shandy. And I remember teaching it, and I remember getting into the philosophy of it, especially John Locke. Um, but sometimes I feel that an author is using so many references, which might not be I was unable to discuss it with the class. Also, if a text, I'm talking in a very technical language, if a text is huge, if there are many chapters, if it is a thick book, then how do I not make it thick for the students?
Well, see how much time you have.
Okay.
Disha, you'll have to mute yourself because it's echoing. See how much time you have at your disposal, and if you have 6 months to teach the book, you take your time and teach it over 6 months. But if you have only 2 hours, you just give them the barest points, the most significant aspects of Tristram Shandy, and then you move on to the next one, because time management is very, very important. Whether you're teaching a class or whether you're giving a lecture or whatever, you have to manage your time well. Right? And then if you're so keen on the text and if you're so interested in it, then why don't you use it for your own research? Write articles about it, become an expert of Tristram Shandy. Why don't you do that? That will be a joy in itself.
Yes, actually, reading Tristram Shandy and getting into the theory of mind and knowledge, I think the students were frustrated, but I clearly ended up being happier. So yes, no, I will. So it's not necessary to then uh, bring up all the references and talk about all the places that the author is visiting. I don't. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
You see, when we were studying T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, that is full of annotations. Full of annotation. Every line has not just one, but 7, 8, or maybe more annotations. And there are so many references. Now you cannot, if in the limited time that you have with your students, you cannot give them everything. So depending on how much time is at your disposal, just invest that much. Be practical. Otherwise, what's going to happen is we used to have a teacher who used to teach us Hamlet. And he was so fond of Hamlet and he knew so much about Hamlet. He would spend the whole year doing Hamlet, and in the last 1 month, he would do the other 5 plays that were in the course. So don't do anything like that. Yes, any other observation or question?
Ma'am, just one last thing. This was about maybe, but this was just about the kind of questions that one can ask the students to write on. What goes behind the framing of a question? It's very easy to tell them that, okay, this is a past year question, why don't you attempt it? But how can one go beyond critically analyze, elaborate, elucidate, discuss? If it's possible to just talk a bit about that.
I think if you can make them think, make them think. And it's not a bad idea to give them a list of topics that you want them to be familiar with. And once they have worked on those topics, then you can give them a particular question. Say, take out a particular episode or a character and ask them to think about it. Why do you think this action, why do you think that this character has been brought into the story? And so on. So just make it a little different, and I repeat, don't make it a drudgery.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, friends. We would stop here, and we have the next session coming. So, thank you so very much, ma'am, for giving us a wonderful lecture on how to teach fiction. And we would love to invite you to CUBB once this Corona period is over. And kindly consider that one request. And now I would request Smriti Thakur to formally propose a vote.
Thank you, sir. A very warm and cherished morning to our most valued resource person, Professor Manju Jaidka, and everyone present here. It gives me an immense pleasure to express, on behalf of the Literature Studies discipline and the entire team, a sincere thanks to ma'am for giving a thought-provoking and interesting lecture on how to teach fiction. I also extend my vote of thanks to our listeners for making this session an engaging and successful event. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, ma'am.
Thank you. How does one close?
Ma'am. Yeah, we will have a 5-10 minutes break to have a cup of tea, and we are not closing this, page. Otherwise, you would again complain that the page is expired. So keep logging in on, and we would come back after by 12. Yeah. Thank you.